It took a while. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Zeitgeist on A Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Jane Roper. Today, I am so excited to have with me Elissa Bassist. Hello, Elissa. Did I pronounce your name right? It didn't even occur to me. No. Bassist.
Bassist. It rhymes with assist.
Okay, I'm so sorry. That was really dumb. I always should ask, shouldn't I? Bassist. But not bassist.
Nope. And I remember whenever I went into like a CD store as a youth, they would be like, nice last name. And I was like, I don't get it. Because I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. I don't think I would have gotten that either. Anyway. Elissa Bassist is an award-deserving essayist, humor writer, teacher, and editor of the Funny Women column on the Rumpus, which is how we met, actually, because you were kind enough to publish something I sent in, and the rest is history. Her humor, essays, cultural criticism, and other writing has appeared in the New York Times, Marie Claire, Creative Nonfiction, NewYorker.com, NewYorkMagazine.com, Long Reads, and more. Her essay, The Never to Be Bride, was a notable in the Best American Essays, and her essay, Why I Didn't Say No, is one of 29 in the best-selling anthology Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture, edited by Roxane Gay. Elissa lives in Brooklyn, I think, correct? Yes?
Correct.
Okay. Teaches humor writing at the New School, Catapult, 92Y, and the Lighthouse Writers Workshop, among other places, I think. Her first book, a memoir, is Hysterical. I love this cover so much. Equal parts medical mystery, cultural criticism, and rallying cry. Hysterical documents Elissa's journey to reclaim her authentic voice in a culture that doesn't listen to women. And you got like the world's most amazing blurbs. Roxane, and I'm in the midst of like doing the blurb quest right now, and it sucks so much to try to get, but you kind of like nailed it here. You got Roxane Gay saying, this is staggeringly good. I am speechless, which as a reader is a rare thing for me. I really just have a bunch of blubbering accolades. This is one of the most intelligent, painful, ridiculous, awesome, relevant things I've ever read. I am impressed. And Cheryl Strayed says, in her dazzling memoir, Elissa cuts right to the heart and delivers an intimate, unexpected, funny, and original yet universal story about voice and silence and illness. Hysterical is an impressive debut. Elissa Bassist wrote it like a motherfucker. We will explain. Well, let's explain now that you are the person who led to Cheryl Strayed coining the phrase "write like a motherfucker."
She actually used it years before me.
Oh, okay.
So I have to credit her there that she came up with it totally on her own, but it worked out so perfectly that the first line of that letter was, I write like a girl.
Yes.
So
yes,
then she could deliver her now famous anthem.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that she had written it before. And I feel like she's inspired millions.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I remember wanting that mug, and when it was like, but it was, I think it was like what, 2010 or something. And my kids were like just starting to learn how to like read things. And I was like, I don't know if I can have a mug that says motherfucker in the house. I mean, obviously now I could, and they would love it, and they'd probably, use it themselves. But anyway, so this book, I loved this book so much. I want to start with what you wrote about it. On your website, you say, Hysterical is a memoir of a voice, about how a woman's voice develops or doesn't in a culture where men talk and women shut up. This expectation of a woman's silence made me sick. And you mean that, I know both metaphorically or not figuratively, but also literally, right? This book starts out with really you having symptoms and having some illness that you were not able to get answers on. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So 3 months after the 2016 election, I suddenly couldn't see straight. My vision was blurry. I remember it happened while I was watching the 89th annual Academy Awards in my Brooklyn apartment. And I was like squinting. I watch TV a lot, so it's very apparent when something's off. And it to me felt like an emergency, because if I can't watch the television, then what is life? So I guess I was like, I don't know what's happening. I guess I just need a new glasses prescription. Many prescriptions later, my vision was just bouncing around. It was a very disorienting and scary feeling, but soon it no longer mattered that I couldn't see, because I had the most intense headache. I called it a wire hanger in the brain headache.
Ugh.
And I had it every second of every day for 6 months.
Jesus.
Which was a lot shorter than I thought I was going to have it. I thought I would never not have it.
Yeah.
And I had never even had like I'd had headaches before, but it was nothing like this.
Yeah.
Then that spiraled into about 17 other symptoms. Some I found answers to, some I didn't. I saw over 20 medical professionals and amateurs for each thing I had. It lasted over 2 years. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but I'm alive.
You're alive. Yeah. So what were some of the reactions you encountered along the way? Because, you know, I think this was one of the areas of the book, like, I could relate to so much, is the way, you know, when women have sort of not easily explained symptoms, the way that they're treated a lot by the medical establishment can be really infuriating.
Yes. So most of the time I heard nothing's wrong with you. Then I had to pressure them and annoy them into testing me and treating me, and which was really hard for me to do, because I didn't want to annoy them. I didn't want to frustrate them. I didn't want to make them do their jobs, essentially.
Yeah.
And I also felt crazy. Like perhaps I was making it up, which many suggested that it was emotional, that I needed to be on psychotropics. I needed to go to therapy. And I was like, I'm already in therapy. Thanks. And the most significant experience of Nothing's Wrong with You was when I went to see, and I can never pronounce the name, gastroenterologist.
Gastroenterologist.
Yes, what you said. Yes. And she was like, what if nothing's wrong with you, after I had, not to brag, shat blood. And my mom had suggested I had been eating beets. No one ever wanted to believe that blood comes out where it shouldn't come out. And they come up with a lot of alternate theories. And then the very next day, after I had begged for a blood test, the
gastroenterologist,
thank you, called me and said I needed to go to an ER because I had a life-threatening disease. And if we hadn't caught it when we did, it would have been fatal.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was just like, told you so.
Yeah. Before you died. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems, I mean, when I was in my 20s, I had a thing that nobody could explain. And the reactions I got, especially with male doctors, were so sort of like, are you sure you're not just, you know, staying out too late? You know, are you like this, you know, or almost sort of like, who do you think you are, asking if you have this syndrome or this syndrome, you know, or this disease? Kind of like, well, I don't know. Tell me what it is. And it is, though, I think there are these power dynamics, particularly when it comes to men and men in authority, where we feel like we're not allowed to speak up. We're not allowed to push back.
Right. And the authority is so real, because they do have all the power and knowledge in the world in these situations. They are literally playing God. And I don't know anything about medicine besides what I've learned from Grey's Anatomy. So I know like half about medicine, probably.
Yeah.
I know if I had a kidney disease, I would be jaundice, and I would have yellow teeth and yellow fingernails. I would be able to spot that, thanks to Grey's Anatomy. But the other stuff, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm also deranged by pain. I'm in the most vulnerable position of my life. I need help. I'm desperate, and I'm willing to do anything. I'm not coming to them from a position of strength where I can like truly advocate for myself. I just will go along with whatever they say. I don't want anything to be wrong either.
Sure.
So it feels like even exciting at times to hear nothing's wrong. It's like, oh, thank God.
Right.
Except for something is wrong, and I need it to be something like a brain tumor so that you can get it the fuck out of me. Sorry.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, it can be really frustrating when you don't have an answer. I mean, the uncertainty and it's like, tell me what at least if you name the thing, then you can, try to treat it. So
exactly. And I got so desperate that I just remember like praying for it to be a brain tumor. Like I wanted that so much, just to have the diagnosis so that I could then have the treatment, and then I could be out of pain.
Yeah.
And I remember getting the scans back and hearing it's not a brain tumor and being disappointed.
Right. Yeah.
This is a messed up state of being.
Right. Yeah. Uncertainty sucks. So, it felt like in that situation, it was one where you felt like you really didn't have the power within yourself to really like push back and advocate. And although you did to some degree, I mean, you were pretty persistent in trying, but you were very much by many people, kind of shut down, like, oh, it's in your head. It's stress. It's whatever. But you also explore this idea of not having a voice through your relationships. And you talk about some of the boyfriends in your life. Fuck taco is one of them. I love that. It's a nice term of endearment. Fuck taco and some of the others, and that you really kind of, I mean, how would you say, like you yielded your power and your voice to them, sort of. It seemed like, you kind of let them be in control of the relationship because you didn't want to, like, you were afraid of being labeled a like crazy psycho bitch, or of, sort of, it's almost like by expressing emotion, you would lose power. So you talk about some of those dynamics that you explored.
Yeah, I remember so well in college going to a lecture, and it was filled, and it was a dating lecture. And the lecturer asked, who has the most power in a relationship? And hands were flying, theories were circulating, and no one got the right answer. And she says, it's the person who cares the least.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh shit. I just I must be the one who cares the least, but I never was. I always cared too much and had to adjust my personality accordingly, because I knew if I were to have any power, it was to not be who I was.
Yeah.
And to turn off my emotions, which was impossible for me. And at some point I didn't even want power. I just wanted to be loved. Yeah. And to be loved was to not argue, not complain, not challenge, not compete, be nice, please my man, bend over backwards for my man, be a good girlfriend, be a good woman. Everything I had absorbed from women's magazines, television, the culture at large. It was just like the water we swam in.
Yeah.
And if that weren't enough, when I did get mad or too emotional, I was punished. I was either yelled at, name called, ignored, ghosted.
Yeah.
So over time, I learned my lesson.
Right.
And it was a lesson I had to learn over and over and over in every single situation, in my relationships, at work, at the doctor. And I was like, there's a theme here. And I was lucky in a sense that I've been working on the book for 11 years only. And while I was sick, I was working on the book, though I gave up for those 2 years because I had one goal only, which was to survive. But once I survived, I saw how related all of these experiences were. And I had wondered why I couldn't stand up for myself with doctors when I was more afraid of being rude than of dying.
Right.
And what led me to getting so sick and from repressing so much and from being so quiet and how that had contributed to my sickness. And I was like, oh, this has just been like, I've been preparing my whole life to get sick because I've been trying to be the perfect woman, which is the quiet woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to interject here to say that this book is also very funny. Like, because we're talking about serious stuff, but I also just feel people need to know this is a very funny book and you're a very funny writer. So moving on from that. So I'm curious to know when, so you write, about the relationships, the sort of yielding the power, at work, you write about, your experiences at one place in particular was sort of a culture, a boss, and then a culture around that felt like you had to stay silent or pay the price. I'm curious to know, like, actually, particularly with regard to the relationships, was it something you were aware of and analytical about when you were in the relationship, or was it really later with sort of the clarity of hindsight?
So I was minoring in women and gender studies. And while I was in an abusive relationship, I was taking violence against women and getting an A. And I was taking contemporary female sexualities, getting an A.
Wow.
And I was even taking contemporary women's health, getting an A+. So intellectually, I knew anything there is to know about being a strong woman and a feminist and standing up for equal rights for all people via oral sex. And but because of how we're socialized and indoctrinated and the culture we live in and how that's in no way separate from our identity, and because I had the fear system of a woman living in a patriarchy, it didn't matter how much I knew. I would still play out the script as it was written before I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not realize any of that at the time. I just was mad at myself and thinking I should know better.
Mm-hmm.
And only after decades of therapy and specialized therapy did I understand that our fear system guarantees that no matter how much we know, the body is always going to know more.
Mm-hmm.
And will act to protect itself and to survive. And our survival mechanisms are really out of whack because of the constant threat of fear that we face every minute of every day and is constantly reinforced. So we will act completely out of character, no matter how much Gloria Steinem we've read, when it comes to protecting ourselves.
Right. And you talk in the book about, I mean, I think this dovetails with sort of the discussions about consent and rape culture, and this idea that it's so easy for people to say, well, she should have just said no, or she should have just stood up for herself, or blah, blah, blah. Whereas there are complicated reasons that women don't say no. And part of that is fear, right? Like, I think there are different levels of fear. Part of it, I mean, in some situations might be actual physical fear, like he could hurt me or kill me. But the other is this more sinister kind of, not sinister is not the word. It starts with an S. Yes, thank you. Has an S in it is what I meant. This insidious thing where it's like, I don't want to hurt his feelings and have him hate me. Like, I don't want him to call me a bitch, and I don't want him to, and this stuff is very real. So it really complicates the whole notion of like, well, women should be empowered to speak up for themselves. But when you've been told all your life in subtle and not so subtle ways that like, no, you really shouldn't.
You really shouldn't. And it actually makes you harder to love, harder to handle. People don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
And when you do face retribution, everything from being called a bitch to being labeled too emotional and being dismissed to women die for saying no. There are actual statistics. There's a term called rejection violence.
Yes.
I grew up like 20 minutes away from Columbine, which was the first major school shooting in a suburban high school. And it was done by two boys who felt rejected by women. And they were the first of what would be known as incels.
Yep.
And that happened to me when I was in 8th grade. Like, even if I wasn't consciously aware that I could be murdered, like that wasn't at the forefront of my mind, that was happening all around me. And I was watching all of these television shows where women were constantly raped and murdered.
Yeah.
For saying or doing anything at all.
Right.
So it was just this omnipresent threat.
Yeah.
And that was the far end of the spectrum. And that was the worst case scenario, even though it's a pretty regular scenario.
Right.
That I found through all of my research, because I didn't want to feel crazy. So I was like, I need to like look this up and back myself up and research, cite, source absolutely every feeling and opinion I've ever had.
Yeah.
Which I did in the book.
Yeah. Is it? I mean, it's impressive. The research you did is really, I mean, it's great. I mean, it really like anyway, yes, I was impressed by your research. Let's just say.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That'll happen when you spend 11 years on a book. You read a lot.
Yeah. Yes. I'm sure.
And when you feel like you're not going to be taken seriously and your own voice isn't enough, you'll do anything to prove the haters wrong.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you're giving yourself insurance here, which in a way is kind of like, I mean, you must reflect about that as well. Like, oh, wait, what? I'm so worried I'm not going to be heard that I need to like get ammunition, you know, to back myself up.
It felt like a meta project for me. Mm-hmm. And I made it all footnotes and it's optional to read. And I feel like I need to do like some kind of warning, like, I don't know who needs to hear it, but the footnotes are optional because some people get really enraged by them. But I was like, but they were there to prove how women are not believed and we need this backup in order to say what we're thinking and what we've observed and for our lived experience to be noted. And I did it. So
yeah. Well, that's funny. I thought you were going to say like, in the paperback, you want to make them not footnotes, you know, because like, fuck yeah, put them in the text. Well, so I actually, confession, I listened to the book mostly. I read parts, but mostly so I had no idea there were footnotes until I read a review. So my experience was they were just like in the text and it was like, yeah, great. You know, it just gave it that sense. So they were not optional if you're listening. And I think that's good. Like they shouldn't be optional.
Right. I mean, everyone has an opinion, like, and I was going back and forth all the time. And then when we did the audiobook and we just like read it straight through, I think I like a few footnotes I couldn't include in the actual text. It would be too wonky. But yeah, it reads well with them in the text. Yeah. And I don't know.
Yeah.
It's important that we exercise choice. So the footnotes are there for you to do that.
Yep.
I guess I'm a David Wallace fan, so
yeah. Wait, you're a what fan?
David Foster Wallace.
Oh, yes, he loved the footnotes. Yes,
very much. And when I started writing the book, I was trying to emulate him and doing a terrible job at it.
No. I mean, they do. It does. It has a certain effect, but it also kind of like because when I was going back and reading it and being like, oh, footnotes, it does there's a tone to it that it actually adds a little bit of edge, which is kind of cool. Like, oh, and by the way, motherfucker, like this is backed up by science, you know, by research. So yeah, go either way. I can see it.
All of my footnotes had the undertone of by the way, motherfucker. I'm glad you called that out.
Yeah, good. Okay. So okay, I want to talk about since we bring up David Foster Wallace and other manly man writers. So, you know, I think when you were first sort of coming up in the literary world, right, which was like the, you know, early, well, like mid 2000s, like 2010, early to whatever you call the 2010s. But it was an era, and I remember because I was sort of steeped in that as well, where the primacy of like white men really, like there hadn't been quite the reckoning that there has been since. Like it was when people were really starting to talk about like, okay, how come when Jonathan Franzen writes about a domestic, you know, story, it's a great American novel, and when a Meg Wolitzer, when I don't know, whoever you want to say does, it's women's fiction, or it doesn't get reviewed in the New York Times. So, and that was probably, I mean, how did you manage to kind of, and that sort of led into your letter to Dear Sugar, saying like, I write like a girl, because that was very much in the air, like it was this sort of. So do you feel like things have changed, I guess is my question, and how have they changed for you in terms of how you think about yourself as a writer?
I do think they've changed. We're hearing and celebrating more diverse voices, and we still have so long to go and so much more work to do. And sexism and bias and racism is so prevalent in who gets published and who gets reviewed and who is called an authority, who gets awards. Like, it's still so skewed and so bad, and the people in power are still not diverse. And yes, but for me, I see a change where I purposefully read other voices, and I seek out other books and other perspectives, other experiences and other stories, and they're there, but it takes work to find them. And sometimes social media can be really helpful because it democratizes in some way exposure and platform. So we get to hear from other people, and I don't feel like I'm worshiping at the altar of straight white men anymore and of their novels. And I'm like trying to A Clockwork Orange myself into like just being like, I'm sick of that same story. I'm sick of that same voice. I'm sick of that same perspective. I'm not interested in it anymore. Like, I've had my lifetime fill of it. And I don't want to emulate that anymore. Which feels really huge. I feel like I have all these other examples to turn to. And I don't have to hate my voice, perspective, experience, style as much, because I'm not comparing myself to people I can't compare myself to. Like, we just are so different. And I was just thinking the other day of how mean these male authors were, like Never Meet Your Heroes kind of mean. And I got this one time, this scathing, yelling, screaming voicemail from Tobias Wolff.
Really?
I was helping to put together as designer and managing editor a tribute booklet for him. So I was reaching out per my boss to all of these people to write tributes because he was being honored for something. And he decided to call me, scream at me via my voicemail to kill the project. It was humiliating for him. He didn't want it. And I was just like, old man, why are you calling this 20-something woman whom you do not know, and you do not know who she is, her story, anything about her, yell at her for doing something nice for you, for helping do something nice for you? And of course, and at the time I was mortified. I was scared. I was so apologetic. I lambasted myself, like, and just thinking about it now, I'm like, I would never call someone who was basically an intern, scream at them for doing something that was obviously not their project, out of this sense of, he was acting out of a fake humility, like, don't honor me, I can't stand it. And and his voice still resounds in my ear, and it's just like,
it's funny to yell at a voicemail it's interesting. Like, I mean, thank God he got your voicemail and not you personally, because
I had learned at that point to stop picking up my phone, because he was one of many men to call and tell me off for any variety of reasons for something that I was not the creator. I was just the doer. I was the executor of someone else's plans and creative vision. And my boss at the time was, he told me often, like, you have to take the hit for this.
Yeah.
Like he did the thing, but he couldn't, he had to be like immune from the blowback, the criticism. And I was like, of course.
Right.
Like, I'm the intern, I'm expected to fuck up, I will take it. And so I just took it and took it and took it from every different angle. I had so many vicious emails directed at me, voicemails, and every single time I took it personally, and it was devastating. And I have not forgotten a single one.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, you know, if you think about it, like, women have been put in the position of being like the human shield for powerful men forever, like as secretaries, assistants, whatever. As you were talking, early in my career in advertising, I was an executive assistant to the president and creative director of a small agency. And there were several times when I was just thinking about this recently, probably because I was about to talk to you. Like, there was an office renovation project, and my boss asked me, please check in with so and so, this other partner in the company, because he needs to move forward on this. And I wrote to him, and he wrote me back this nasty email, like, this process is going to be really rough if you're going to keep nudging me like this. I'm like, you think I'm nudging? Like, I'm doing what my boss told me to do. Like, would you talk to him like that? Like, would you talk to that guy over there like that?
Yeah. And it's like, and they know because they all have interns, assistants, editorial assistants. And it's just like, you think I'm the one responsible for this?
Right.
No, but you're choosing to yell at me. And they have called me names. They have accused me of just acting irresponsibly and for nothing, for regular business decisions, for things that happen every day. But their reactions were crazy and too emotional and
kind of psycho.
Psycho.
Yeah.
Psycho. And they are still so successful. I see their names still all over the place. And I like flinch, where I'm like, that guy called me a liar for something my boss told me to say.
Yep. Yes. And it just seems like it's so rare for like men to face consequences for being problematic bosses. But then if you hear about like whatever, Amy Klobuchar, or is that her name? Amy? Yeah. Or other, like, women who could be, not that it's okay to be like, for anyone to be a douchey boss, like that's not fine for women either. But it's somehow we're more shocked and outraged by it to find out.
Well, the bar is just so high for women and the tolerance so low, and the bar is so low for men and the tolerance so high.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a few more minutes, and I want to talk about voices, like literal voices. People hate women's voices
so much.
Speaking of like Amy Klobuchar, like, and you hear it so much around politicians, right? And it's almost like that sunk Hillary Clinton, was half of why people decided they hated Hillary Clinton. What do you think that is about, like the actual sound of women's voices that triggers people?
Since the beginning of time, people have decided that women sound shrill and men sound incredible. They should win Grammys for the sound of their voice. There are so many factors. I'm just like the beginning of sexism.
Speak, because I'm enjoying listening to your voice.
One problem, I think, is that we have invented all of the language, all the descriptors for how much we hate women's voices. We think that they are unlikable, nasal, shrill, bossy, bitchy, all of it. But we have no language whatsoever to complain about men's voices.
Right. Men are not called shrill. You've never heard a man called shrill.
Never. So we don't complain about men's voices because we don't have the descriptions, but that are readily available and used at whim to describe women's voices. Also in our culture, men are the dominant voice. They speak for everyone out of every venue. And I collect all the receipts. about how often we hear men and how little we hear women, because we expect women to be a face and a body, but men have thoughts and opinions. So we're not used to the female voice, actually. So when we hear it, it feels like nails on a chalkboard, because we're so used to getting our news, stories, opinions, jokes from this low bass voice. So those are like just a few reasons why we hate women's voices so much. We also just hate women. So whatever they do or say, by extension, is terrible.
Unless it's, you know what, I was thinking the female voice that people like is Siri and Alexa.
Well, do we like it because
they're helping us? They're serving us.
Helping us. They're subservient. They're these idealized women's feminized voices, but we also tell them off all the time. I am constantly calling my Alexa a bitch when she fucks up, which is all the time. Like, I feel rage at her. And I've been reading articles about like chatbot abuse and how often we like to tell them off, and they respond, you know, flirtatiously or kindly. Like, they don't talk back.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing that until recently, if I can't remember if this was in your book or I read it somewhere else, but like until recently, if you made a suggestive comment to Siri, she would say, "I'd blush if I could."
That is in my book. Yes.
That is in your book. Okay, good. I was going to take credit for it, but
she also will tell you where to bury a stripper.
What?
He'll give you like nearby, and maybe this has changed, but I remember this was like a running joke that we would always ask Siri where to hide the bodies of sex workers, and she would tell you like a nearby pit or graveyard.
Wow. Interesting.
Because who's making all this technology that enables all of this hate?
Dudes.
Yeah.
It's dudes.
We need more women in STEM.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. Alrighty. So I don't want to like you said, I don't want you to give away sort of the one piece of the book and things that happen, but do you feel like you still have a ways to go? Do you feel like for you and for women in general, even like badass feminist women, like this is an ongoing thing to try to reclaim and find and reclaim your voice?
Yeah, I feel like it's just a matter of undoing lifetimes of socialization that we personally gone through, and that our culture continues to reboot. So we're up against this machine that wants to bring back sexism and racism constantly. So that's really hard, because we're not relearning in a culture that's conducive to that. Like this culture right now, we're like in the backlash of the backlash of the backlash, and it's like doubling down on its prehistoric views and outdated, retrograde, stereotypical views. So that's hard, and it means we have to risk a lot. We have to risk being murdered. And I describe in the book how it's reasonable to fear that when you check out the statistics, although at the same time, our fear system is so out of whack that it goes to that worst case scenario when it is not often the scenario. Right. But I want to acknowledge it's a very real reality for a lot of women and marginalized identities, because there's just so much hate that just skips the foreplay and goes straight to the murder. And we see it all the time in our entertainment. These lives are disposable, and we feel so annoyed by them that like we don't even care. Like I find myself often rooting for women to die in my entertainment, because I'm just like, oh man, like she didn't give him his orgasm. Like she's such an annoying bitch. Like, because I empathize with the storyteller and the narrator, the protagonist. That's what art does. And that's why it is so powerful, so moving. So there's a lot to risk, and we still have to risk being called a fucking bitch, like AOC was called by one of her colleagues.
Yep.
We have to risk not getting the job, which we see all of these politicians who are women not getting the job because they said one thing wrong, or because their voice reminds voters of their wives and their mothers. We have to risk annoying people and coming off as too emotional, and knowing that that's bullshit and it's patriarchal propaganda.
Yep.
Like, well, I have just found that like all of my fears have just been instilled to keep me quiet and to protect people from my emotions, from my accusations, from me calling them out. And I've been a really loyal foot soldier. And in the process, I haven't said what I thought. I haven't stood up for myself. I've, again, taken it. I made myself sick. And I forget that I'm a person in every single interaction, because I prioritize their comfortability and their opinion of me. And so we have to risk falling out of favor. We have to risk making someone else uncomfortable in order to protect ourselves and to advocate for ourselves and to say something. I mean, I'm constantly in my head saying, just risk annoying the handyman by asking him a question.
Yes.
Risk annoying this editor by asking to remove a line that makes you feel too exposed.
Right.
And a lot of time they are nice and there is no repercussion whatsoever. And I'm like, wow, I built that up until I was so anxious and the result was fine and I feel great.
Right. Yeah. It is scary. It's really scary. I mean, I am guilty of like, you know, if there's an issue, like they fixed our car, but they messed something up, like, you know, I'll be like, to my husband, like, can you call them back? And like, I don't want them to think I'm a bitch, or call me a Karen or whatever for speaking up and, or even, you know, God forbid, sounding annoyed because they screwed something up. And like,
all the time. I was just visiting my parents and my mom was giving my stepdad a script of everything that he needed to say to someone who was working on the house.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Are all women the Wizard of Oz? Just like behind the curtain?
We're pulling the string. Yeah.
And it was like, I totally knew. And I don't know what you do. You just have to like risk being that annoying person, but then it risks a lot, because then the person's going to annoy you and not do what you need them to do. And you need them to do what you need them to do. So you have to play the game accordingly.
Right. Great. Well, it's going to change, though. It is going to change. It's so going to change. I just, you know, I wrote this when I was, you know, pimping the book on Instagram. Like, I want to give this to every woman, but I especially want to give it to young women, you know, like, and I just reading, I was like, God, I wish I could go back to myself at like 18, 20, 25 and just be like, just don't shut yourself up. Like, even if it's just a little more, like take some of that power. And it certainly, you know, as you get older, I think it gets easier. But then that's kind of messed up too, because it's like, well, as you become middle-aged and like less visible to people as like, you know, a source of like sexual allure or whatever, then you can speak your mind, because I don't know, then you're like a crone or something. So you're expected to be, you know, a browbeating bitch or something. I don't know. But
I think what you're saying is right, is exposing younger people to different narratives, because we got a really uniform narrative.
Yeah.
And everyone was like clamoring to say the same thing. And I feel like now we do have these other voices and we can choose who to pay attention to.
Yep.
And we need to choose to pay attention better and get exposed to other perspectives, and not just mine, of course, because I have like this white woman perspective, and that's a very, very limited perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have to, it's like, I don't know who needs to do it. Like, educators need to have more diverse reading lists. I don't know how to control media, but I feel like if
we put more women in charge of it.
Reading. Yes.
like more women, more people of color, like as those are the folks who determine what we're going to see, that we're going to see it changing. And, you know, just has to happen.
I also have faith in the TikTok generation.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I mean, some of their memes really suck. This is my kids, you know, they're like, one of them in particular lives on TikTok, but man, they are way ahead of the game in terms of like that empowerment than I was at that age. So yeah, it's good. I have faith also. All right. Well, on that positive note, Hysterical by Elissa Bassist is fantastic. Y'all should get it. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us here today on the Zeitgeist. It was really awesome talking to you.
Thank you for talking to me so much.
Yes, and best of luck with the book and for whatever else comes next.
Thank you so much.